Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been an ongoing franchise since 1998 and has evolved from a dark manga about a lonely teenage boy who likes board games to one of the most successful trading card games ever released. One of the most diverse ways to enjoy this franchise, however, comes in the form of video games, which have varied mechanics, stories, and way to ogle cool monster designs. So let's take a walk through different kinds of games that exist throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's 20-year history, going from 1998 all the way through to 2021. And let's see exactly how we got here. Yu-Gi-Oh! True Duel Monsters Sealed Memories was released on December 9th, 1999 in Japan, but Western audiences would see this game in the US on March 23rd, 2002, renamed as Forbidden Memories. That's pretty far in the future from the 90s. This game was released on the Sony PlayStation, much like the very first Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game, Capsule Monsters Breed and Battle. This time, however, the game's design would head in a much different direction than before. While fundamentally the same card game as previously depicted, this is further refined from the Duel Monsters games released so far, and yet, we're still nowhere near an actual simulation of the real card game. The Western version of this game came with 3 promotional cards: Harpy's Pet Dragon, Metal Morph, and Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon. The Japanese version, however, came with 3 cards randomly selected from a pool, including the previous 3 cards as well as Zoa and Metal Zoa. Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon came with an art that would be exclusive to this promotional card until the release of Legendary Collection 4, at least in the Western world. This was also the first printing for all cards mentioned in the United States, making this Harpy's Pet Dragon particularly sought after until its reprint in Retrospective. This game makes great strides towards representing the final product of the card game, but it still contains a lot of DNA from the Duel Monsters games that came before it. This game makes the change to having 5 monster zones as well as 5 spell and trap zones, a large departure from the previous entries that only allowed you to play 5 cards total, and your trap cards had to share the field with your monsters. Additionally, while each player still has a rigidly maintained 5-card hand, you must play a card on each of your turns, and you are also always the first turn player. You also can attempt to fuse cards from your hand to create a monster, and they will attempt to fuse in the order that you select them. This both allows you to try and create a powerful monster by fusing weaker ones, and also allows you to dump your entire hand, as each player must draw to 5 cards in the beginning of each of their turns. Fusing a monster and a spell card will attempt to equip the spell to the last monster in the chain, but if it's not a qualifying monster, then it'll just bounce off. Spell cards equipped to monsters, however, just absorb into the monster and disappear from the game entirely. They don't reside on the field anywhere. Both players still have 8,000 life points and maintain an exactly 40 card deck, although there is no deck cost associated with any card this time around. Also, this is the first game to include a limit on the number of copies of a card that can be in your deck, which is 3, just like the actual card game. We see a complete removal of attribute and type related damage modifiers for this game, but trade it for an astrology based system instead. If Blue Eyes asks what time you were born, just block their number. This astrology system is basically unique to this series of games. Each monster has one of 2 signs it can belong to, and this is decided upon its summon and cannot be changed further. Ever. If 2 monsters battle, their signs are compared to one another and can, depending on how the signs stack up to each other on the chart, remain unchanged or gain 500 attack. For example, a Mars monster running into a Uranus monster has no stat changes because they are not adjacent on the chart, but a Mars monster running into a Jupiter monster gains 500 attack because Mars is advantageous against Jupiter. Take that, Jupiter. That being said, a Neptune monster running into the Mars monster will cause the Neptune monster to gain 500 attack. This is of course because Neptune is water and Mars is fire. Obviously a well-known fact. You can still only play 1 card per turn, but now you can make a choice to play whichever card you're using in face up or face down position. Yes, even spell cards and trap cards? That's right, you can play your trap cards face up straight from the hand. They don't do anything in this case, but it is a very funny thing to do. Speaking of trap cards, there are several in this game, and all of them trigger as soon as a relevant action occurs from your opponent. You cannot decide when to activate them, so if Kaiba attacks with Shadow Spectre instead of Blue Eyes White Dragon first, That trap card is swallowing up the more imminent threat. Obviously. Spell cards can be played face down to be activated later at any point on your turn, which is a huge deal. This game forgoes percentage values for its affecting attack and defense points, choosing to instead work in intervals of 500, which is much easier to think about and consequently also means Shadow Spell, which is now a spell card, takes 1,000 attack from each monster, which is far more devastating than what the card actually does. Monsters finally have their levels, but alas, they are purely cosmetic. No tributes exist as of yet, so feel free to play a deck that is only 7-star monsters or higher and you'll be just fine. We also see further development into the patented glue 2 cards together from your hand to see if they fuse to have even more combinations. Although this game is famous for one very specific powerful card that is easy to fuse in almost any situation, Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, other iconic monsters can be fused together to get you one big guy in a pinch. This game features a campaign mode, free duel mode, versus and trade mode, as well as a password mode. This one allowed you to use the passwords located on the bottom left corner of a card to put them in your game in exchange for star chips, one from each duel. Some monsters are relatively cheap and easy to get to improve your deck early on, cards like Jirai Gumo for instance, who has 2200 attack and only costs 80 star chips. A duel victory nets you between 1 and 5 star chips depending on your performance in the duel. Now, while you might think more powerful cards like Blue Eyes White Dragon surely cost a lot, right? And you'd be correct. A copy of Blue Eyes White Dragon can be yours for the low price of 1 million star chips. This game makes certain iconic, powerful creatures prohibitively expensive as a means of balancing what players can have in their decks at any given point. Otherwise, there'd be no point to the free duel section, where you can duel opponents over and over again for better cards, and of course, more star chips. There's also a library mode, which allows you to view any card you've encountered in the game, and if it's a monster, you can view its 3D battle for use in the 3D battle mode. This game is purely a race to the top, filling your deck with cards like Red Eyes Black Dragon, Dark Magician, Skull Knight, and the most powerful individual card you can receive, Meteor Black Dragon. And that's really the goal of the game. Supplementing these already powerful cards with powerful spells and traps also becomes a must as you get into the endgame. But these spells and traps are not provided by simply winning a duel with a POW rating by depleting your opponent's life points, oh no. These powerful spells come from tech victories, by depleting your opponent of their deck. There are 2 victory conditions in this game, depleting your life points and decking out. There's also Exodia, but literally no one in the US could even see that without cheats, and in Japan you'd have to use the Pocket Station, which we will get to in just a bit. Depleting your opponent's deck completely would reward you with either an A or S tech victory, which would more often than not net you a spell or trap as opposed to a monster. The problem is, though, since you are forced to go first and you must always play a card, mathematically you will always deck out first. There's 2 ways around this. One is to hope your opponent fuses into their hand. This will cause them to draw more cards on their turn since you have to draw to 5 every single turn. Additionally, you can deplete their life points when they have very few cards remaining in deck. However, in both cases, you have to make sure you're not losing too many life points yourself, or too many monsters, as this will negatively affect your final victory score. In Japan, players could make use of the exclusive Pocket Station accessory, which could interact with various games to provide them with extra in-game content. In the case of Forbidden Memories, this meant getting rare cards otherwise unobtainable in the game, like the remaining pieces of Exodia that were not coded to be dropped by any duelist in the game. This game, for being one of the earliest entries for a franchise, really just creates a whole setting and scenario that goes far beyond what anyone would have expected. Even the Japanese cover for this game indicates it is an adventure role-playing game. The player is thrust into the role of an Egyptian prince to the pharaoh, who is not only very good at duel monsters, but is also a petulant teenager who runs away from— oh my god, is that Simon Murin? Oh man, finally! You can either run away from the real main character of this franchise, or you can duel him to gain your freedom for the night to frolic around Egypt with your friends Tayana and Jono. You can duel Tayana or one of 3 nameless villagers who really encapsulate the kinds of people you would find at an actual card shop, so I guess this game is historically accurate after all. After this, you make your way to the temple grounds where a ceremony is taking place that is much darker than anyone would really like to acknowledge. Eventually, we find Yugioh dueling priest mage Seto, and being shown that he is a third-rate serf with a fourth-rate pile of tablets. Being the best friend in the world, the prince offers to throw down with Seto, but is instructed to wait for him at the dueling grounds as he is called to handle some mage business. Seto does eventually arrive, and you absolutely trounce him in card games. He gets so mad about it that he recognizes the prince for who he is. Oh, by the way, your friends don't know that you're the prince. I don't know how that hasn't come up so far, but they don't know, and he's trying to keep his identity a secret. Okay, and makes a direct threat to our safety. We go to our room to process the absolute roasting of Seto we committed, but find that, actually, Seto and High Priest Haishin have had it with the monarchy and are attempting to overthrow the pharaoh so they can use the Millennium items to plunge the world into shadow, so Haishin can rule it, probably. After being cornered by Haishin, you are forced to duel him and lose. His deck is so overwhelmingly powerful at this point in the game, you literally stand almost zero chance. If you do beat him though, he demands a rematch as you must have cheated somehow. Also, the game won't progress until you lose. It's very dumb. Once you are rightfully shoved into the dirt, Simon Murin throws you the Millennium Puzzle and instructs you to smash it to save yourself. Upon doing so, you not only halt Haishin's plan, you also seal yourself in the puzzle until thousands of years later, a young boy solves it, and then the original run of the manga takes place, more or less. You wake up in a waiting room where Joey says you have to hurry up or you'll be late for the tournament. This tournament is being held by Seto Kaiba himself. It's unclear when this game thinks it's taking place, but Shadi and Bakura both make reference to actions taken against them from the manga, so it's just fanfiction, I guess. You face off against a rogues gallery of weirdos from the manga and anime, including Rex Raptor, Weevil Underwood, My Valentine, and Bandit Keith. The final rounds have you collecting the Millennium items from Shadi, Pegasus, Ishizu, who's called Isis in this game, Evil Bakura, and finally, the well-known holder of the Millennium Rod. That's right, you guessed it, Seto Kaiba. They turn into spirit cards, and once all are collected, they combine together to release the spirit in the puzzle so he can return to his world and rescue it. Keep in mind, the anime had not concluded in Japan yet, so this game was really making some calls about where they thought this story was going to go. When you return, you learn Haishin has run wild in your absence, claiming 6 of the 7 items, and he's managed to unleash some of the dark power that resides within them. Each of the items is now protected by one of 6 high mages in important temples around the land. There is one for each field spell type of forest, meadow, water, mountain, wasteland, and finally, the rod is held by Haishin himself, who has a field of darkness. I don't know where they're getting all these terrains, by the way. This is ancient Egypt. Is there just like an oceanic sanctuary somewhere in the mountains? Anyway. After defeating each of the mages, you can make your way to the sealed temple as Yugioh alerts you Tayana has been kidnapped. Technically, you can rescue her earlier, but this is far more dramatic, right? Right. Upon defeating the Guardian Labyrinth Mage and moving right, left, right, a movement pattern that has become a core memory for me, you confront Seto, who released Tayana under the promise you defeat Haishin and take his Millennium item because he is tired of his rule. Very believable, Seto. Very good job. No one's gonna think you're gonna betray us immediately. When you defeat Haishin's guards, Sebek and Neku, you take on Haishin for real this time and clobber him with your powerful cards you definitely spent a long time doing in an intended fashion, and not in any other way. Then you make your way back to the Valley of Kings and try to seal the items when suddenly, Seto reveals he was never a good guy after all! Oh, I can't believe it. He uses all 7 items to call upon Dark Knight, a very trustworthy looking fellow who threatens to, instead of granting Seto power, consume the world unless the prince can defeat him in card game combat. Once you beat him, he shows his poor sportsmanlike conduct and transforms into Nightmare and forces you into one final duel. Once he is defeated, you seal the items away for good, reclaim your kingdom, and live happily ever after. I guess. It's a fairly rote story, but one that is beautifully depicted with gorgeous backdrops and evocative imagery, excellent character designs, and one of the best soundtracks you can find on the PlayStation, quite frankly. Don't forget your secret code, though. We'll need it in a few years when Duelist of the Roses arrives. Overall, this game is well regarded for a reason. Despite being a mediocre video card game even for the time, it made great strides mechanically and even created a unique setting that fans still remember to this day. To call this game a cult classic at this point feels like an underestimation. While Forbidden Memories stands on its own in the larger franchise of Yu-Gi-Oh games, its characters would return for an additional outing a couple years later. But our next game will see us return to the Duel Monsters series of games, and with that, the first Yu-Gi-Oh game released in Western territories. I'll see you in the next one.